Welcome back to The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Calistra Farrier. Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamla Bissessar, has declared that the Caribbean is not a zone of peace. It's running contrary to sentiments of other regional leaders. At the United Nations a few days ago, she highlighted the murderous state of Trinidad and Tobago and the pressing issue of illegal migration. The Prime Minister took to the global stage in New York, where she expressed her gratitude on two occasions to the United States President Donald Trump for the military presence, the U.S. military presence in the region. The U.S. claiming that they're combating narco trafficking. They've blown up two boats, the U.S. saying that they were drug boats, providing absolutely no evidence that those boats were in fact involved in any illicit activity. There's word that they could have been fishermen out, and the United States operating, CARICOM coming out just after the first operation to say that they were not informed that the U.S. was actively carrying out military strikes in the Caribbean. However, Prime Minister Kamla Bissessar, the only prime minister in the region, supporting the United States fully and also saying that the Caribbean cannot be a zone of peace, varying sharply from her Caribbean counterparts, such as the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Rav Gonzalez, and the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. They used their time at the UN to address and to emphasize the region's peaceful identity and to call for de-escalation around the Venezuela situation. I'm being joined now by political analyst Dr. Shane Mohammed of Trinidad and Tobago to break it down and to find out just what kind of impact the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister's sentiments can have on regional unity, also among her constituents in Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to the program, Shane.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Let's start with your reaction. I'm sure you heard the comments made by the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister, your Prime Minister at the UN. What is your reaction to that statement that the Caribbean cannot be a zone of peace? What do you make of that?
I think it takes a lot of gusto, taking into consideration the context, that I believe she would have meant that the Caribbean is not a zone of peace. Anybody who knows Trinidad and Tobago and has been paying attention to Trinidad and Tobago in the last decade and in the decades before that knows that Trinidad and Tobago has been the hotspot of the Caribbean when it comes to crime and criminality, drug trafficking, transnational organized crime, human trafficking, illegal immigration, high murder rates, and the list goes on. But it takes um, it takes some drastic measures to really and truly fix a problem rather than complain about a problem. When we look at the Venezuela Guyana issue and the fact that there has to be consistent monitoring of what happens in the Essequibo region, between Guyana and Venezuela, and the issue of the Essequibo region has only arisen because of the fact that Guyana is poised to become one of the richest nations in the world and has one of the fastest growing economies in the Western Hemisphere. And therefore, suddenly the Essequibo region becomes something of importance to the Venezuelans. When we look at Haiti and the issues that are arising in Haiti, that we are yet, after all these years, to find a solution to, and no one in the region has seemed to go to the United Nations and raise the issue of what has happened in Haiti in a manner that says we all need to come together, as Haiti being a member of CARICOM, to find a long-term solution to what is happening in Haiti. I mean, if we want to turn a blind eye into the Caribbean Sea and not and pretend that there isn't drug trafficking, transnational organized crime happening in the region through the islands, going into Europe, going into Miami, then so be it. But then that makes us all complicit to the fact that we are turning a blind eye on things that threaten the region as a whole, but also threatens economies and societies singularly. And Trinidad and Tobago, I am tired and fed up of hearing everybody say, oh boy, things hot down there. Things are hot. Yes, things are hot. So it's time to cool it down. And if cooling it down means that for once and for all, somebody is going to help us from outside without having us to expend money that we don't already have, then so be it.
But it is, I mean, you have Trinidad and its problems, which, of course, Trinidad's problems by virtue of CARICOM and the sisterhood of nations in the region becomes everybody else's problem and the proximity and everything else. Apart from that, the Trinidad being a hot spot and a hotbed of all kinds and all manners of crime that you listed before, it does seem to be a bit different from the whole concept of the Caribbean as a zone of peace. I mean, dealing with issues, difficult issues in one nation, does that necessarily throw out the branding that has been created and promoted that the Caribbean is, and that the Caribbean is a zone of peace? I mean, in political terms, what does the concept of a zone of peace mean for the Caribbean region?
The concept of a zone of peace for the Caribbean region means that we all live in harmony. There's good relations between all of us from the Bahamas come all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago. That there's cooperation, there's collaboration, there's free movement of people. But the Caribbean region isn't just from the Bahamas to Port of Spain. It is not just Nassau to Port of Spain. The Caribbean region is all of what the Caribbean Sea touch. So that also extends geographically to the Venezuelan to South America, Central America, Costa Rica, all the way up. But there is a zone of peace should be able to see prosperity. It should be able to see camaraderie, to possibly um, you know, economic growth and development, political stability, all of the above. But what we have in CARICOM, and I've said it before and I'll say it here fearlessly, CARICOM is broken. CARICOM is broken, has been broken institutionally for many years, and we have not made movements towards reforming CARICOM and turning it into an institution that should promote Caribbean unity. Because only in June 2025, we had Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves considering that the OECS states should consider removing itself from the CSME agreement so that they can better position themselves for greater integration while still staying within CARICOM and benefiting from whatever benefits they can get from the CARICOM regions. We've had Trinidad and Tobago is contributing one of the highest amount of money towards the CARICOM, the management and the effective governing of the CARICOM Secretariat. But when you look at the amount of persons from Trinidad and Tobago employed by CARICOM, it's the statistics show it's on the lower end of the numbers. So we want to push a zone of peace, but zone of peace also means equality, equity, collaborate. When has anybody in the region said to Trinidad and Tobago, we want to help you with maybe some strategies, maybe some innovative thinking with regard to how things are going down there? The question is, we want to push a zone of peace. Zone of peace also means self-sufficiency when it comes to international security. Can we secure ourselves by being self-sufficient without external assistance from anybody? And the answer to that is no. If that was the case, then we would not have to depend on the United States. We wouldn't have to depend on England. We wouldn't have to depend on anybody outside.
But some may say, Dr. Mohammed, that Trinidad and Tobago's failure to manage its own affairs internally, its failure to keep crime down, to ensure that the economic markers that need to exist to offset social issues that lead to increased crime rate, that their failure to properly deal with the issue of drug interdiction, they've failed to take care of their business on the Trinidad and Tobago. And now, within this zone of peace that the other leaders are trying to promote, Trinidad is saying, you know what, well, we didn't take care of things properly. No, we need outside help. We're throwing it all out the window. Welcome, United States. Bomb as much as you want.
No, I don't think we're saying bomb as we want, as much as they want.
Well, it sure
We
sounds
have to
like she's totally, it sure sounds like she's ready to throw on her own flak jacket.
We have to take into consideration that the geopolitics that we're facing in the world today is far more complex than it was 20, 30 years ago. And we have to be very careful. And there has been indications that if we are not strategic and we are not careful as to how we meander the geopolitics that is facing the Western Hemisphere today, we may find ourselves at the losing end of the stick. And that is not just the losing end of the stick for individual states; it is losing at the losing end of the stick as a region. And are we prepared to be at the end of that stick that is going to consider us a severe loss? Now, let's just say that there is an issue arising between Venezuela and Guyana. How are they? How? I keep asking this question, and I want the international relations specialists who are talking about diplomacy and zone of peace and all of it. How, therefore, are the ships, any ships, supposed to pass if they were to access Guyana? They are going to have to pass by asking the Trinidad and Tobago government to pass through its sovereign waters. That's what is going to happen. So Trinidad and Tobago is very much unique compared to everybody else. And yes, I will tell you this. We There are many people who will say that Trinidad and Tobago failed to fix its own domestic issues. Between the period, and I'm blaming governments, but I'm blaming government in the last decade. I did the research on Venezuela and the collapse of democracy, the collapse of society, the collapse of opportunity in Caracas and in Venezuela in 2016. And I took that paper to Peru. I went, I went into Caracas as a visitor, but really went there to do research. And what I found is that there was a mass movement of the working class and the educated, either north or either south or into Europe from Venezuela. Why? Because the Maduro administration had moved away from the tenets and the philosophy of Chavez, and all of the Chavistas were now becoming targets and to political acrimony. The point is this: there has been a large movement of illegal persons out of Venezuela into Trinidad and Tobago, and there are elements of crime that has happened in Trinidad and Tobago in the last 10 years that the former administration failed to address effectively because we were playing hopscotch with a gas field and an oil field, hoping that we would be able to utilize that to gain revenue rather than look for sustainable and innovative opportunities for economic growth for Trinidad and Tobago. And it didn't work out. In 2018, when Prime Minister Motley was chair of the CSME, she said openly that there's a mandate for Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, and Guyana to become the breadbasket of the Caribbean because of the fact that we were outside of the hurricane belt. We had the land that was able to produce. What did Trinidad and Tobago do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So we were busy focusing on friendships with Venezuela that did not guarantee us real results. For 10 years, we've been courting Venezuela, and it didn't do us anything. In fact, President Trump between 2016 and 2020 blacklisted Trinidad and Tobago. We were persona non grata. We were not. We were literally pushed to the back burner when everybody else, Prime Minister Motley, Prime Minister Holness, Guyana's president, everybody else in the region was at the front and center engaging with President Trump at the time. Trinidad and Tobago became nobody, and that benefited not a single soul within the society. I think that we have to be very careful and we have to play the geopolitics that is existing in the world to our benefits. More than ever now, neorealism and elements of realism is across the globe, and it is being projected by all of the core states that are fighting to dominate the world's hegemony. And if we, as semi-periphery states, are not playing our cards right, we are going to end up to be severe losers. It could cripple our economy, it will damage our society, and it could leave us with long-term damage that we will not be able to recover. We will border on failed states. If I have a prime minister that has come back from the has come back from a political desert that nobody thought that she could come back from with a constitutional majority and has remained popular among the population of Trinidad and Tobago because of decisive action, I would say it would be political foolishness for her to not take the opportunities available to her and dance to the beat of the drums that will take Trinidad and Tobago into a space of prosperity.
But the concern, though, would be that while she protects, while Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Bissessa protects Trinidad and plays the geopolitical game and dances to the tune that benefits Trinidad and Tobago, it runs contrary to the sentiments of and the actions of the other countries in this group that Trinidad still remains a part of. Uh, can we see, given the history of integration, can we see, given the geopolitical realities and, as you said, the need for one to look out for oneself and protect one's interests, can we see Trinidad and Tobago's emerging stance shaking what you admittedly said is now a fractured organization, CARICOM? Can Trinidad be the straw that crumbles the CARICOM house?
No, I think it would be St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I make no apologies for that. You know why? If you look at, we are supposed to be a region of integration. Very much, we are supposed to be able to move throughout the region to be able to provide goods and services, products, employment, all of those things. But there's a caveat in all of that. The OECS states only employ OECS member state citizens. That's a flaw in CARICOM as an overarching body. So there has to be equity and there has to be equality. But we pretend that there is when there isn't. We want to play games with ICLAC, and we want to be aligning with through CELAC and all of these places and pretend as if the great United States does not exist. And we would be foolish to think that Mr. Trump cannot do, by his domestic actions and his foreign policy that touch and concern his own nation's sovereignty, cannot damage developing and underdeveloped states. Take, for example, your prime minister has opted, Grenada's prime minister has opted to amend the Cuban doctors' policy as it pertains to the employment program. Why? Not on his own volition, on the advice of the United States. Why? Because we have to understand that even that could have consequences for the small island developing nations that are very much a stakeholder in all of this. If it was that, if it didn't matter what the United States said, then Prime Minister Dickin would not have to change the policy. He would not have to look at it. He would not have to examine it. He would not have to amend it, because we could safely say, well, whatever, that I have sovereign right. I can do what I want when it comes to Cuba. But then there's something. How do we want losing opportunities in the United States? No. Do we want our children, our students, to still pursue higher education in the United States? Yes. Employment? Yes. Trade? Yes. All of those things touch on and concern collectively the region, but individually every single state. And if we don't do act to the tune and dance to the political tune, then we are entering into more dangerous grounds. Venezuela is irrelevant. Venezuela is defunct. Venezuela is holding on to riches and assets that they cannot use. There's evidence to show that Venezuela is persecuting its own citizens. And we want to turn a blind eye and be friends with them as a result of what? What is the benefit? Is the benefit from that we will gain from Venezuela greater than that of the rest of the world or the United States? The answer is no.
But that, yes, and even in the Grenada situation, I mean, I saw a statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in which they announced that they had revised the arrangement with Cuba and also thanked the United States for bringing it to their attention. I mean, that one line stood out, especially given the utterances that were taking place over the last few months since this Cuba human trafficking medical brigade issue came up, that we were taking a stand your ground, stand with Cuba position. And it has moved gradually to the point now where we're acknowledging, almost showing gratitude to the United States for drawing to our attention something apparently we had no idea, a travesty that we had no idea was being perpetuated and had to be corrected. So, and it does show Grenada almost eating humble pie to protect itself in this push and pull and tug that we found ourselves in the middle between the United States and Cuba. But even with all of that, Shane, the those interests that 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 we need to protect. It's a little bit different than telling the United States that you can go ahead and basically start a war in the Caribbean. I mean, it comes
We
down to
can't do
that.
that. But you know what? We can't tell them they can't do it either. Because they could argue to all of us that they have assets and they have precedents and they have territories within the United States.
But if,
Within the
but yeah,
Caribbean region. They have the
but even if the United States does what the United States does, which is just bulldoze its way through, it is different from having a cheerleader, one of the larger nations, one of the stronger nations in this group that brands itself as a zone of peace, having your biggest cheerleader be from that group. It's different.
because the biggest cheerleader from that group is the most vulnerable. We are listen, we've seen the kind of murders. We have had evidence, we've had utterances of the behaviors of illegal migrants. We've had questions of whether or not there has been elements of gangs in infiltrating Trinidad and Tobago society. Now, I'll also say this, and I make no apologies for this. Trinidad and Tobago's current prime minister is inheriting a basket of garbage and bad management and poor leadership and poor governance, not just from a domestic perspective, but from a regional and international perspective, inherited from the Keith Rowley administration that sat down and folded their arms and said, Maduro is our friend. We need Maduro more than he needs us. And therefore, we will dance to that and open the borders and turn a blind eye to the issues of illegal immigration. We have a flawed system of migration registration. We have a flawed system that it is 10 years in the making, so it's almost institutionalized. She now have to come in. She has to come in through national security from a domestic from homeland security perspective and break down those institutions. We have to take a hardline position with regard to deportation. We have to take a hardline position where we now need to seek assistance to protect that border between in the Gulf of Paria between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. We have had she also has to take a position. As much as she's saying to the United States, bomb who you need to bomb, she's also said to Trinidad and Tobago citizens, I've warned you all, if you all go into Venezuelan waters for whatever purpose, whether it is to trade, whether it is to trade humans, whether it is to, whatever you do, whatever business you have over there that is not legal, and you get caught, don't expect me to help you. And she said it time and time again. In fact, there was a group of persons that got into the Venezuelan territory and they were captured. And she said, I warned you all. So therefore you will stand the consequence. So she's not only she's not only warning
But
persons
Shane, and I get
domestically.
that. But let me ask you this though. The United States maneuverings in the Southern Caribbean and in the Caribbean basin, really, do you believe it has to do with them having any desire to help Trinidad and Tobago curb its escalating out of control crime situation?
If we could benefit from their movements in the Caribbean region, I would say we should take it. Whatever their plot is, as it pertains to whatever their intentions are from a foreign policy perspective, from within the United States, within Washington decision making, as it pertains to Venezuela, that's not my business, that's not our business. Whatever they do, they deal with that. If we can benefit from their presence to help curb crime and curb the entry from a state to state perspective, I'm going to take it. Because you know what? CARICOM has shown it is every man for himself. We are conveniently collective. We are conveniently unified. We are not, over from 1973 to now, we have not shown any sorts of development and movement towards collective agreement and collectivity as has done within the European Union. And our CARICOM model in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas is fashioned after the European Union. And take, for example, we are so collective, we are so unified, we are such a great space of unity and collectivity and integration. Look at the CCG as an example. A waste of money and resources, and we are fighting each other as to whether we should agree or not agree to adopt the CCJ. And how many states in a 15-member state region has accepted the CCJ? The CCJ is one small example of how fragmented we are. The OECS is another example of how
But
fragmented
but
we are.
but but
So
the fact but the fact that our systems and our institutions, in your opinion, may not be working. I'm sure a lot of people agree with you on some of these issues. Many people are concerned about just how CARICOM operates and the benefits and the reason for CARICOM. That
yes.
not notwithstanding, the isn't that a different issue from us saying to a foreign power it is okay to run amok in our space?
But we can't stop them even if we didn't give them permission.
We
We can't
can't
stop them.
stop them, but giving them permission might be a bridge too, some may say might be a bridge too far, don't you think? because
If that
because
is
it,
a bit,
because I have
let
failed to deal with my domestic issues, I am saying, uh, you know what, this person can now come and they can help me to deal with my domestic issues, but it means that all of my neighbors are going to get disturbed by this solution that I failed to take care of inside of my house.
when and therefore it comes back to a simple example. Then Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell, should have said to the great United States of America, my policy with Cuba is fantastic and I don't see it being flawed. Thank you very much for your advice, but I will reject it. I'm very satisfied with how our working relationship goes with Cuba, and we will continue to be in that employment.
While a lot of people in Grenada probably wish that that should have been the answer, uh, changing an agreement with another country is a bit different than encouraging um, military action and the bombing of boats without any evidence that they are actually what the United States says they are. I mean, are we being pulled into a situation based on Trinidad's fear of what is happening domestically?
No, I don't think it's a matter of Trinidad's fear of what is happening domestically. I think the picture is bigger than domestic only. I think it has to do with where are the benefits? Where are the benefits in this global space as it pertains to the route towards development, growth, and prosperity? And we
So,
have to take into
so
consideration.
the route to prosperity, the route to Trinidad's bigger picture means taking that position, taking that stance, thanking and praising and welcoming the US and its military action in the region. It's simply expedient to protect the interests of Trinidad and Tobago. Is that what we're saying here?
It is in the best interest for Trinidad and Tobago in the long term, beyond just security. It is to the benefit of all nations that depend on the United States at some level for something that could lead to a crippling of economic growth and development if a heavy hand was to be dropped on any economy. So, for example, what happens if the corporate United States, JetBlue, American Airlines, Delta, you name it, is given a mandate: stop flying to the region, stop flying to Trinidad, stop flying to Grenada, stop flying to St. Vincent, stop flying to Barbados. You're not going there anymore. And we can't say that it cannot be done. It can be done. What happens if President Trump gets up and say, you know what? You all want to pretend that you all don't understand what is going on and don't want to help me with my agenda. Sanction you, sanction you, sanction you. Revoke visas, revoke visas, revoke visas. You have no access into the United Nations. Even the United Nations, if they wanted to move the General Assembly from from New York City to Geneva, didn't do it. Why? Because who is the largest funder of the United Nations? Even NATO, great nations like NATO, is not willing to take that risk with the United States because what was going to happen? You see, what we are facing are deep woven webs that has existed beyond our current time. Things that we did not foresee. Political theory, international relations theory, diplomatic theory did not tell us that we would be here today. And therefore, there's no theory that tells us how to go, which direction to go. We have to ebb and weave and utilize the best strategies to get the best outcome we want, because we are in uncharted waters, we are in volatile times, and it is not anytime going to get better. And therefore, the best, it's like we're walking in a minefield and we have to dance to and hope that we don't step on a mine.
And no one prepared us on how to deal with a Donald Trump situation.
No.
Doc, finally, because we are out of time, though, the zone of peace as an ideal versus a reality. From everything that we've talked about in this last few minutes of the interview, you seem to have the position that it's more of an ideal than a reality, given all of the geopolitical considerations, the issues of migration and crime, and all of those other issues that impact our maintenance our maintaining the Caribbean as a zone of peace. Leaders still aspire to this zone of peace as a diplomatic ideal, even if from what you say the
Listen,
reality is difficult?
look across the world. Look, and let's go to the furthest parts of it. Let's just go to New Zealand. New Zealand is one of the most prosperous nations, most peaceful nations to live in. And they, if they don't govern and don't use strategies and they don't take into consideration the dynamics of their society, they may end up into a civil war with the Maori people. And the Maori people have shown that their representation within the parliament is a force to reckon with. And if they don't get the kind of governance that they expect from the non, how should I say it, Aborigine people, then they are prepared to disrupt. So zones of peace has to be taken in the context beyond just bombs and wars and warships. Warships have traversed the world for the longest while, over 100 years. Listen, we have not had a zone of peace. Even Christopher Columbus, when he came into in our region, turned it into a zone, disrupted our peace. So the zone of peace is not just it's just not limited to warships and aircraft and military. It is also, the zone of peace is redefined by sovereignty. It is redefined by disruptions in trade. I mean, all of the theories that we've learned about for bilateralism and multilateralism, and even for diplomacy and within the geopolitical arena, all of those theories have all given us a different version of what a zone of peace is. You think Europe is a zone of peace? Europe is tiptoeing very carefully with its greatest threat, which is Russia, because a bad move could cause it to go into war within a few seconds. So nowhere in the world it can safely say that it is a zone of peace unless you go to Antarctica, you go to Iceland, or you go to somewhere that's utopian. But the zone of peace is beyond just military. It is about cooperation. It's about everything within the neoliberal perspective as well.
And if you go to Antarctica without your proper warm gear, it would probably not be a zone of peace either.
And a zone of peace is, you know what? It also has to do with that level of mindset and all of that. You're right, but that's where I stand. That we can't pretend that we are all holding hands and singing kumbaya when we really and truly prepared. Behind our back, we have the dagger waiting to pull it out because I need to get that opportunity before somebody else. Let's not pretend.
Dr. Mohammed, I want to thank you so much for joining me here on The Narrative. A pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Take care.
This is The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Calistra Farrier. That was Dr. Shane Mohammed, political analyst from Trinidad and Tobago. We were discussing the comments made by Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessor at the United Nations General Assembly when she said the Caribbean cannot be a zone of peace. More when we come back.